Hello and welcome to Lecture 5 in Tourism as a Strategy for Sustainable Development. Coincidentally, this lecture is called Tourism as a Strategy for Sustainable Development. It draws in everything we've spoken about so far and starts thinking about tourism as a strategy that people use and community use in nations all over the world as a way of economically, I guess, improving their place and thinks about whether that's actually sustainable or not. All right, so I'll just, sorry, don't mind me, click that. There we go. Okay, so just to recap, drawing in what we've already spoken about, we already have discussed that development and sustainable development are contested concepts that are in the global language. So although everybody talks about it and everybody has a strong sense usually of what it is or is not, not everybody thinks it's the same thing. And that's a really important thing when you're thinking about agencies that might fund development, that are trying to condition communities to consider development as the same thing as them, when those communities might learn, and in many cases they do, they might learn how to play the game of being of speaking the language that the development agencies require to get the money that they need, so then they can actually do what they think that they need to do to actually develop. And that you see that quite regularly. So there's sort of like a dual face. There's the face that we put on for the aid agency or the World Bank funding investors. You get the money and then you implement it in a way that actually meets your goals and needs. And I think a lot of developing nations in particular are very cleverly working out how to play that game to their advantage. There are different ways of measuring development and sustainable development, as I say, so different people think about it in different ways, and we discussed that already. And agencies operate within power structures to deliver development outcomes. Okay, so that agencies that, as we discussed in the previous lecture, agencies at a local level, right through and communities and tourists, even groups of tourism wholesalers, right through to international development agencies, all have power structures they work within to deliver some form of development outcome, but not always the same thing. Okay, and the question I guess we can ask in amongst all of this, not confusion, because I think there's a lot of common ground on what people think about these things, is what can tourism achieve within this? And there have been a number of people who've actually considered that in the literature and in organisations such as the UNWTO that I'll have a little bit of a talk about today. And so that's really honestly the lecture today, is thinking about what tourism can do to achieve the sorts of goals that people are talking about. Okay, I'm not going to discuss the readings because usually that requires a two-way conversation. However, as always, I would encourage you to read them, and they're available on the Moodle site. Okay, so learning outcomes. I think we can leave that. They're the learning outcomes for this unit. In this lecture in particular, we will be referring to sustainable development theories. And I'll be asking you to really think about tourism in sustainable development, what its role is. And you may even want to start thinking about evaluating tourism development strategies in the context of sustainable development theory and practice. The reason I'm raising these now is because these are what you're going to be assessed on. In the end, we have to mark whether you can deliver these things, and the way we do that is through your assessment. So this is what we're really looking for, and this is what your assessment rubrics are based on. Okay. All right, so today I'm talking firstly about sustainable development theory and tourism and how they interact. I'll introduce UNWTO and the 5 pillars of sustainable tourism for development, because that's probably the most universal way that people look at things. It's certainly not the only way, but it's possibly the most common maybe, I don't know actually if everybody knows even about it, but it does, because of the all-powerfulness of the UNWTO and how linking in with them and following their principles allows communities and nations to access funding from the World Bank and places like that. They are quite pervasive. They actually do find their way into a lot of people's policies, whether they are intuitively right for their destination or not. Have a little bit of a look at Bali, and I've got a picture up here of Bali that I took on holiday a couple of years ago. This is the rock bar. You can see up in the background there's Kuta and Denpasar, and sometimes you can't see one in there, but quite often you see the planes just coming in. It's amazing how many planes are arriving in Bali from all over the world. It really truly is becoming a global destination. This place is just south of Jimbaran, and it's a very famous bar called the Rock Bar. It's a bit of a quintessential Bali experience these days. It's a truly luxurious, almost European, opulent experience, almost that a feeling of being in the Amalfi Coast or somewhere in Greece, and that's kind of the feeling they're going for. But it's got a real beautiful flavour of Asia. It's quite interesting. It was voted some years ago the best resort in the world. That's quite some years ago now, by some rating agency. And this has been one of many cornerstones to Bali's tourism development, from these massive, hugely invested in resorts, all the way down to mums and dads operating little barbecues on the side of the street. And then we'll talk about the principles of sustainable tourism development. Okay. Right, so let's just have a quick revisit of sustainable development theory. As we've already discussed, the most common way that people talk about sustainable development is in terms of these three spheres, so economy, environment and people. They often have different names. People might be called culture or socio-cultural or a whole bunch of other things, but essentially it's about people. The environment's usually referring to the physical, natural and physical environment, not always necessarily natural. The environment that's the built environment's kind of a mix between people and environment. And then the economy, money. And how they overlap, and the little triangle in the middle that overlaps fair, livable and viable is really where a lot of people argue sustainable development dwells, as being able to balance those things. Okay, so in 2015, the UN put forward the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which we've already discussed in our previous lectures. So this sort of forms the basis of most UN policies these days. Usually you'll find that all of the alignment, the child program, the literacy programs, the clean water programs, all of those things are aligned with at least one, if not many, of these 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And the question to really ask is where tourism fits within this, and can tourism assist in the delivery of these goals? There's a lot of people who say that it can. So the UNEP, so that's the United Nations Environment Programme, and the UNWTO has for some time said that there are many positive contributions of tourism to sustainable development. They say that tourism can be a source of opportunities for enterprise development, even in remote places. And this is important. So many, as you may know, if you're familiar with Australia, many of the remote places in Australia are also the most disadvantaged. They have the highest unemployment rate, highest infant mortality rates, low level of services, not always even access to clean drinking water. And there are very few economic opportunities in places like that. You may have farming or mining or some of these larger sort of more primary industries, but sometimes these places are actually in incredibly beautiful landscapes. Sometimes tourists actually find the remoteness of a place and the lack of people to be very appealing. And so there's opportunities there to actually draw certain people into your community and actually develop an enterprise. And so tourism can often develop in really unusual places and provide people with an opportunity for income. Probably one of the best things about tourism is that it brings tangible economic value to natural and cultural resources. So having a beautiful waterfall or a beautiful river is in itself not actually, although it's wonderful and beautiful and probably culturally important and helps with the livability of a place, which may help with migration and so forth, in the end there's not a whole lot of tangible economic value in these. Having festivals, having strong cultural norms and things like that are things that people are actually really interested in seeing, observing the difference in people, the difference in how people do things. And so the tourism can actually bring tangible economic value to these things. People, when then visit them, they'll pay for a tour of this, or they'll have a look at this waterfall and pay for their lunch, or they'll buy a postcard. They'll pay money for the transport to get out there. Sometimes they might need to stay the night, so they might have some accommodation there, and so on and so forth. So one of the wonderful things about tourism is that beautiful natural environments, their value is in preserving them and keeping them beautiful and natural. And that's one thing that tourism does very well, and provides an income for. A lot of people say that tourism promotes intercultural understanding and connection. So obviously when you travel to a place and you get to know a place really well, or you feel like you're a part of the community, you might experience kindnesses from certain people in a community, and you formally, previously, before going to that place, may have not had a favourable idea about that culture or those people. And now you've been there and you've actually met people from that culture, you may be more inclined to think that this culture is a warm and loving culture. Certainly I know in Australia there's go back to our Bali example, there's definitely been for a long time a racist component to the community, and that's born from hundreds of years ago when we had policies, or over 100 years ago, when we had policies and things that were coming into force to actually stop Asians from doing well in our community. And there's been a deep suspicion since World War II and the Japanese invasions of Papua New Guinea and places like that, and bombings and so forth. And so there is a component to the community in Australia that actually feels very suspicious of Asian people. And these people, when they then decide to go on their cheapy, gorgeous Bali holiday, even though there's Asians there, come across Asians and realise that these people in Bali that they meet are actually quite lovely, and that may break down barriers, may make them think that maybe not everybody in Bali is, horrible and mercenary and ready to beat down our door and invade us or whatever. Anyway, that's a long explanation, but I think you know what I mean. Another really great thing about tourism is that there's low barriers to entry for entrepreneurs. So tourism has always been very, very good at spreading economic value or economic benefits to the community if it's managed well. Even in places like Ho Chi Minh City, there's an unemployment program for tuk-tuk riders with I don't think they call them tuk-tuks actually in Ho Chi Minh City. I can't remember the name of them, but men riding, usually men, not always, riding bikes with a large seat at the back, so you can, like a taxi, get around the city. And those opportunities to get involved. I think you can actually borrow one of these. geez, I can't remember the name of them, but tuk-tuk style things. You can actually borrow one and make some money off it and pay some rent. So there's actually really no entry barrier at all. So you can actually make your money. And if you work harder, you make more money to a point where you can actually make enough to then buy your own and return the tuk-tuk to the agency that rents them, so then you can start up your own business. You could, if you wish to, you could actually take that further and potentially one day even buy your own motorbike. Perhaps you could buy one or two tuk-tuks and have a business of tuk-tuks or whatever. You start thinking about, developing your competitive advantage and offering, interpretation or speaking English and all sorts of things. And so there's often ways that even the poorest of the poor can engage in tourism. I'm sure with anyone who's travelled to any developing nation will have seen people selling their wares on the side of the streets, people selling food and transport options and things like that. And also, of course, tourism is based on assets, natural environment, rich culture, warm climate, in which developing countries have a comparative advantage. And that's really quite interesting. I mean, I don't know if I believe that, because I think there's beautiful natural environment and rich culture in Europe, and certainly wouldn't be considered a developing country, but there are some absolutely incredible cultures in developing countries. So I'm not sure if I'd say they have a comparative advantage, but they certainly do have some places do have beautiful natural environments, rich cultures, and, well, I guess Europe doesn't always have a warm climate, so maybe that one. But I guess what I'm saying is that these developing countries have these things that they can maximise on. They don't necessarily have to sell their hills or their trees for mining or logging or whatever. Okay, so I've written this as negative contributions of tourism, but I guess detractions of tourism from sustainable development might be a better way of putting it. I'm not really sure, but so these are sort of the negative sides anyway, from the same publications as before. Tourism can put pressure on these fragile ecosystems. So whilst the value and the integrity of these ecosystems or natural assets such as waterfalls, a reef, rivers, mountains or whatever, of utmost value to the tourism industry. All the visitors, if you don't manage the visitors well, their presence alone can actually put quite a lot of pressure on these ecosystems, and paths can be worn in places that might disturb the breeding of certain species, which may be intrinsically important to the health of the ecosystem and the growth of the trees. You may have cleared areas, certainly in Cairns and the larger sort of region of far north Queensland. A lot of areas, for example, in Mission Beach, have been cleared for housing development, tourism development, and those areas are cassowary habitats, and cassowary is incredibly valuable to the tourism industry as an iconic species, and also to the ecosystem because of the way they transport seeds and berries. And so but their environment is being taken away because of roads and access and development. So there's sort of this balance that needs to be found so you can love something but not love it to death. The pressure on host communities and the potential dislocation of traditional societies. Certainly in Cairns and Darwin and a lot of places in Australia that have traditional owners or local Indigenous communities, quite often the place where the traditional communities lived prior to a European settlement were the same places that the Europeans wanted to live, often on the waterfront, near access to the ocean or transport to other communities, near rivers which might be rich sources of food, on plains which might be quite fertile and grow food trees and things that they could harvest food from or species from that might live there. And of course, as these places develop, the traditional owners or the Indigenous communities still want to live in these places, but are pushed away and pushed out because they may not be able to afford to live there. They may decide, they may want to sit around in the parks, but they're moved on because it's considered unsavoury or unsafe for large congregations of these local people to be sort of sitting together. It might not feel safe for tourists. And so quite often these people are actually moved on and sort of closeted away somewhere separate where people can't see them, which is not really their traditional country. And you see that happening a lot all over the world. There's lots of other examples. Even in Cairns, the European population, the vast numbers of tourists that come in, sometimes it means that you miss out on opportunities in Cairns. You also gain lots of opportunities in Cairns because we have a lot more money coming in from tourists, so we have more restaurants and more activities and things than other sort of cities the same size because of the tourist industry. But the downside is also that there are a lot of tourists in the city. You can't always drive around the roads without having a rental car in front of you, which doesn't know where to park and things like that. So there's and also just that pressure of having a lot of people using your infrastructure where they may not actually pay for it. We pay rates and things in Cairns to pay for our parks and so forth, yet quite often we're competing for their use with tourists. That's two sides to all those stories. Competing for the use of resources, there we go, contribution to pollution as well. Obviously, the movement of people around instantly creates, is burning fossil fuels usually, not always if they're riding bikes or whatever, but mostly. And also, obviously, when people go to a place, they'll be having possibly longer showers. They'll be using soap and things like that, which obviously then go into the environment. They also may even just litter if they, can't find a bin or that's different. They have different cultural norms in their places. And sometimes tourism can also be a vulnerable and unstable source of income. Certainly in the pilot strike in the late 1980s in Australia, it brought a lot of tourism communities such as Cairns basically to their knees because the main way of people accessing Cairns is via airlines. And all of a sudden, practically overnight, because of something that was completely unrelated to Cairns as such, the tourist, the business, the main staple business just stopped. And this put a huge amount of pressure on local operators. Some people went out of business. Certainly natural disasters such as cyclones or earthquakes can also have an influence on people's perceptions of a place and may stop people from going. So there are sometimes a global financial crisis is another one. So there are times when, in the global financial crisis, a lot of people stopped travelling because they were conserving their funds. They weren't sure how the world was going to go. And so it's very important for people to tourism-based destinations to have resilient strategies to manage that. Okay, so this is sort of a little bit even more so that was a basic sort of assessment drawn from those things, but Crouch and Brent Ritchie in 1999 actually put together this long list. So these are probable impacts of a successful tourism development program on a typical tourism destination. So they're trying to put some sort of generalised set of negative and positive impacts that are worth thinking about when you're thinking about tourism as a strategy for development. So, you've got them in the different sorts of, categories. So economic, physical, social, psychological, cultural and political. And they've got both the positive and the negative sides of that. So, increased expenditures, creation of employment, new facilities, improvement of local infrastructure. So not only are there people using it, but because you've got more money coming into the community, there's also more infrastructure to support it. strengthening of community fabric via volunteerism, increase local interest and participation in regional events because they may have a bit more critical mass behind them because people are coming, tourists are coming, they may have more people there, and that may actually bring even more people in, local people to participate more. Increase local pride and community spirit. If people think your culture is worth looking at and visiting and seeing, then you may take more pride in it. And if it's economically beneficial to you also to maybe promote and present your culture, then you may have a lot more pride in it. Increase awareness of non-local perception. So you're thinking about how people see you versus just thinking about who you are. So that sort of performance aspect. Cultural new ideas from exposure to other cultures and their way of life. So maybe things that you've always done that might not work very well, you start thinking about the needs of your tourists and you might and your visitors, and you may find that actually there's a better way of doing things and improve things. And strengthening of regional traditions and values. Enhance international recognition of a region and its values. So that may give you political sway. If people value you really highly as a place to visit, then you may find that you actually political will may sway in your favour because that culture is too valuable to the source market. Propagation of political values held by government and or population. Okay, so your views and the way you see things, if people love what you are and love you enough to come and visit, then people might like the way you do things, and that may then send that message out. For example, to people in China might come to visit Australia and say, hey, we like it better there because, you know, they have a different government system or whatever. They also may not. Okay, so on the negative side, there's price increases during special events and high season, for example, real estate speculation. So sometimes you can be priced out of your own market to buy a home. Environmental damage, overcrowding, development of the greed factor, acceleration of undesirable social trends such as excessive urbanisation. So obviously if you have a bigger business, you'll end up potentially with more workers coming to your community. They have to live somewhere, and so that can actually end up with quite an urban place when people may be visiting for natural factors. Tendency toward defensive attitudes concerning host regions. So that's sort of the opposite of increased local pride and community spirit. So it could be to do with, you know, you can't come here and tell me what to do, or we're sick of people expecting us all to speak Japanese, or all sorts of things. A high possibility of misunderstandings leading to varying degrees of host and visitor hostility. Commercialisation of activities that may be of a personal or private nature. So on one hand, we could be presenting our culture to people, but on the other hand, we might want to package it up in a way that's easy to consume for those people. And in doing so, we may modify it beyond what we feel comfortable with, or put more to the point, businesses and organisations may modify our culture beyond a point which the people whose culture it is feel uncomfortable with. And that's been documented quite a lot, that trend. Modifications of nature of event and activity to accommodate tourism. So, you know, you may have a ceremonial slaughtering of a pig and you realise a lot of tourists don't find that very tasteful. So all of a sudden the pig slaughtering aspect of your festival drops away, and that is a modification and a change that you may not actually really want. You may not want to lose that in your, and not only that, if you lose that, it may also lose its authenticity, which is a whole nother aspect. Okay, economic exploitation of local population to satisfy the ambitions of a political elite. And that happens all the time. So people say, yes, please come and build your Marriott 5-star hotel in our most delicate ecosystem that we have. Yeah, it's wonderful. And, oh, you're going to take me out for dinner and buy me wonderful gifts. There's a lot of crackdowns on that across the world now. You know, it's called corruption. You know, you get the Marriott and all of a sudden all the politicians are going out for dinner there, and they're lining their pockets because they might own the construction company that got the contract to do it, and so on and so forth. There's a lot of nations that are becoming wise to that, but it still happens quite a lot as well. And that can have tragic and disastrous impacts on local communities, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. Distortion of true nature of events to reflect values of the political system of the day. So if they're talking about propagating their system, then that may, I guess what they're saying is that cultural events might take on a political aspect. All right, so the UN WTO and the UNEP came up with, in 2005, 12 aims for sustainable tourism. I think this document's available on your Moodle, so you can have a look. There's a special, they're talking about the special relationship between tourism and sustainable development. And these are the sort of key things. So this is UNEP's, the UN Environment Programme. So this is ways that tourism can be environmentally responsible. But it also talks about cultural richness, community wellbeing, employment quality, local prosperity, economic viability. I won't go through that because this lecture's going to go for a really long time. Otherwise, I'll probably have to make it into 2 lectures at the moment because it's taking a while. But these are key things, and what they did was, when they wrote this, is they mapped these 12 aims for sustainable tourism onto the, sorry, I have to click it, onto the sort of economic, social and environmental sphere idea. And the cool thing about this is, and I'll just move my head so you can see, the cool thing about this is that it gives you the 12 aims of sustainable tourism and shows that all 3, for every single one of those, all 3 of economic, social and environmental pillars of sustainability are critical. Sometimes in local economic viability and local prosperity is swayed towards economic, but it also includes social and environmental. Employment quality has hardly any environmental, but some. But it's what it's really displaying here is that there's not one that's all just about the environment, one that's all about the economy, or one that's all about social. That in fact each challenge or each aim for sustainable tourism involves all 3. Okay, so the UNWTO's definition of sustainable tourism development is tourism that takes full account of its current and future economic, social and environmental impacts, addressing the needs of visitors, the industry, the environment and host communities. So you can kind of see there that they're sort of drawing on this, the old Brundtland Commission sort of definition of meeting the needs of the current generation without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. It's got that same sort of idea of current and future, thinking about stuff now, but thinking also about how this is going to look in the future. And that's really what sustainability is. Sustaining means continuing through into the future, and that this is what they're talking about. Can we sustain this and continue this into thinking about the future, not just thinking about now? So they say that sustainable tourism should make optimal use of environmental resources. It should respect the socio-cultural authenticity of host communities, and it should ensure viable long-term economic operations. So it's taking environmental, socio-cultural people and economic things. So it's just sort of giving some flesh around that. In 2010, so all that stuff before then, that's all from 2005. In 2010, Diane Dredge is an academic and a tourism planner like me, and she proposed the sustainable tourism triangle, balancing environment, economic and social, and she talks about it just specifically in terms of tourism, so balancing the use of environmental resources and the economic benefits of tourism and so forth. So she wrote a paper about that, and that's in your Moodle, so you can have a look at that and have a think about what she says. Then in 2013, the European Commission and the UNWTO put out this book called Sustainable Tourism for Development, which is also available on the Moodle site. And they came up with 5 pillars of sustainable tourism for development. So essentially they were drawing down on the 17 goals for sustainable development. And I think, oh no, actually I think this predated the 17 goals for sustainable development actually. So this, I think what happened was that they got the 5 pillars of sustainable tourism for development. Then the 17 principles for sustainable development came out, and then I think there's a document that I discussed in the first or second lecture that actually tells you about how there's those two, the 5 pillars and the 17 goals, relate to one another. Okay, so the first pillar of sustainable tourism for development is, according to these people, tourism policy and governance. Okay, so they're saying here that tourism, to ensure that the sector is correctly positioned as a force for sustainable development, it should be fully considered in development studies and frameworks for the country and be given due recognition across government. Okay, so they're saying that you need agreed tourism policy strategies and master plans that commit to sustainability principles, so that tourism, everything that's legislated to do with tourism has to have a sustainability aspect. There has to be adequate legislation to deal with both tourism and sustainability. There has to be a specified ministry, so, you know, the Ministry of Environment, Resources and Tourism or something like that. There has to be a named and a person responsible for tourism in the government, and that person can sort of advocate across sectors for tourism to be sustainable. And it needs to enable and encourage private sector interests. So it can't just be about developing government tourism enterprises. It needs to encourage competition to, better, choose my words carefully here, to better promote competition to better meet the needs of the tourists. That's my neoliberal philosophy coming through in saying that, because deep down I don't think I've seen many government-owned enterprises that have effectively done that job, but it may not be always the case. Trying to encourage a more critical thought around this. Encouraging private sector interests generally is accepted as a better way of promoting tourism, but it's not the only way. Okay, pillar 2, economic performance, investment and competitiveness. The sector must be competitive if it's to succeed as a force for development, okay? So this is, I guess, what I was just talking about. The performance and impact of the sector is adequately measured and monitored. So you need national, local, state, whatever, tourism statistics to show what sort of contribution tourism is making to the community, where it may be taken away from the community, how many visitors you have, how much they're spending, how long they stay, that sort of information, so you can actually measure what the tourism industry is actually doing. Trade agreements and investment policy that can lead to the opening of markets, and that's a very neoliberal approach that not everybody might agree with, but it's interesting. Enabling environment for small local enterprises to develop. So this is harking back to what I was talking about before about having a low barrier to entry industry, to have opportunities for people who are less advantaged, generally the poorer people in the community, to be able to actually develop their own industry, and linkages with other sectors such as agriculture and creative industries, so farmers supplying locally produced food to hotels or operating agri-tours, and creative industries, local arts and crafts that may enhance the uniqueness of your destination, those sort of linkages can be really valuable, both for the benefit of tourism and also the benefit of the locals. Tourism products and services in line with the needs of growth markets. So through number one, understanding the market, you can see who's coming from where and meeting those needs. For example, China's obviously been identified as a growth market in a lot of places, and you find that nowadays we might have Chinese language brochures that explain where toilets are, or how to find an ATM, or how to access healthcare, interpreters on hand and things like that. So we're not changing who we are, but we're making sure that we meet the needs of those people to feel safe and happy in our community. And also resilience. That's really just planning for unforeseen events, giving yourselves spare capacity so you can respond to an event without breaking the bank, that you have recognised ways of self-assessing how you're doing. When I mean that, I guess, looking at yourself and understanding how you make decisions, so then in times of stress, you're able to make better decisions. And resilience is really about just being able to respond to things like, natural disasters or the global financial crisis and things like that. Being able to look at yourselves and reassess and come up with a management strategy. So having functional management systems as well. Okay, pillar 3, employment, decent work and human capital. So careful planning of human resources involving consultation with private enterprises and employee representatives is needed to ensure that tourism can fulfil its employment creation potential and has a sufficient supply of suitably skilled labour to meet future growth. Okay, so the decent work agenda: income, working conditions, personal development, freedom of expression and equal opportunity. So key sort of principles, and certainly in the Western world, of work practice. Labour laws respected across the sector. So, you're paid for the hours of work that you do and so forth. Identify skills gaps and provide training in areas relevant to the sustainability of tourism and the green economy. Environmental management, so also providing skills, increasing your human capital, your ability to interpret and understand the environment. Pillar 4, poverty reduction and social inclusion. So some of these previous pillars are now contributing to this pillar. The special opportunities presented by tourism as a labour-intensive and diverse sector for benefiting poor and disadvantaged people. Government and private sector to determine which interventions can best support poor communities, such as value chain analysis. Value chain analysis is about understanding where... I haven't looked actually at value chain analysis for a while, so feel free to Google it. The value chain analysis idea, I'm just thinking through this now, I think is about looking at the supply chain and thinking about where the profit is being taken. So if you're not getting paid fairly, and I guess in Australia a classic one is the agricultural industry and supermarkets, whilst the supermarkets are pushing prices down and farmers are quite often not getting fair prices for the produce, the supermarkets may be lifting the prices up. And so the value chain analysis, I think, is showing that the price you pay, the money is not being equally distributed across the supply chain. In fact, quite the opposite. And in a number of communities, I mean, if you think about getting a massage in a developing nation such as maybe Vietnam or in Indonesia, in Bali or wherever, if you go to your hotel to get a massage, it might cost you, $50 Australian, and you'll have a person doing it, and they will be paid possibly less for giving you that massage in the hand to take home at the end of the day than if you walk down the street and asked a local place, which will give you maybe not quite the same surroundings, but a cheaper massage, but the person walks home at the end of the day with most of that money in their pocket, minus the rent that they might pay for the place that they're in or whatever. Same with getting your laundry done, same with the food that you eat, you know, those sort of things. Large organisations tend to take more and don't pass that down, international hotels especially, and often don't pass that down the chain of supply. Increasing the proportion of tourism income that reaches or benefits the poor with a focus on minorities. So there you go, I think that's sort of the same thing. Preventing or minimising negative social impacts of tourism. So competition of land for land, water and other resources is really important, and unwanted social change. So thinking about the social impacts of tourism and how to minimise that. And through doing this, I think probably local communities are consulted, engaged, empowered to influence decisions. So people have a way through voting or through, you know, being on local consultative committees, but having a way of actually influencing what's happening. Okay. Well, this is hilarious. I've gone from pillar 4 to pillar 6, and I think we all know that the 5 pillars of sustainable tourism for development don't have 6 pillars. So this is actually pillar 5. I'm not sure how that happened, sorry. Sustainability of the natural and cultural environment. So the previous pillars have talked a lot about people, work, economic performance, governance, yeah? This one, finally, talks about the natural and cultural environment. So in my mind, pardon me, I wonder if that's, I don't know actually, I think that's probably how it needs to be, but you wonder if there's not very much, there's a sort of a bias towards the people aspect or the economic aspect of this, but in fact I don't think there is, because if you get those previous pillars right, pardon me, if you get those previous pillars right, then the natural and cultural environment will become more sustainable. So they say that tourism has a unique reason to be concerned about these issues owing to its dependency on the appeal of unspoilt landscapes and accessible local heritage, including the importance of the sustainable consumption of natural resources such as water and energy. That's better, sorry. So that's kind of putting into words a lot of stuff I've already said. So they're saying that you need policies to conserve cultural and natural assets within and outside the tourism sector, a mitigation of tourism contribution to climate change, transport and accommodation, so more things that we've already discussed, adapt to the impact of climate change, so that may be rising sea levels is probably a common one, or maybe increased intensity of storms. Actions to promote sustainable production and consumption, such as water and energy. So using those things to you know, minimise the consumption of water and energy in the production of food, for example, transport of food, using local food rather than food from a long way away, and sustainably managing fisheries and things like that. Planning instruments, impact assessment, certification and financial incentives, drawing on the on international experience, standards and conventions, and the measurement and monitoring of impacts. So there's another mention of not just measuring who your tourists are, how they contribute to your economy and that sort of thing, but also measuring and monitoring the natural and cultural impacts of tourism. So that's the 5 pillars of sustainable tourism. Now, I think, yeah, in Pollock in 2013, which is another one that's on your Moodle site that you can have a look at, argues that even though we have all of this stuff and all these pillars and all these this understanding and knowledge about how important it is to manage tourism sustainably, there's still, Pollock argues that uneven and unsustainable development in tourism persists. And I think you'll probably find there's a theme of that in your Mo Fourth and Month textbook as well. So you have commodification, and that's talking about what I was saying before about maybe modifying products to beyond maybe even recognition to meet the needs of tourists, and potentially compromising the cultural value of things, and also potentially monetising traditional and sacred things that shouldn't be monetised, shouldn't be commercialised, shouldn't maybe even be sold. The uneven distribution of benefits and costs. So the costs of the poorer sides of the community, often the cost to them outweighs the benefits to them of major tourism development, not always, but it can. And the other way around, the benefits may sort of be much more significant for business owners or business leaders who are maybe making the decisions, and so their cost is much less. Their mansions in the special part of town may not have the highway or the airport runway going through their homes, and in fact they may make sure that their enclave is far, far away from those places, but the poor may not have the option of living anywhere but there, and they may be dislocated, for example, but lots of things like that. Perishable products equals supply and demand pricing. So yeah, tourism is perishable. A night stay in accommodation is gone tomorrow. You can't stay there that night ever again. It's gone. So tourism is a perishable product. If you purchase it, you have to consume it at that time, whenever you've purchased it for. And if you don't purchase it, you don't consume it, then it's gone. And that can result in sort of a really strong supply and demand pricing, which is not always easy to predict. Like I say, if you come back to the global financial crisis and natural disasters and things like that, that can suddenly influence significantly the amount of money that you might be getting for the same product that you got maybe $300 a night for. Last week, you have a cyclone come through. So, for example, Hamilton Island in the Whitsundays in northern Australia, you may end up not even being able to sell your room for a month, and then finally you can only get $150 a night for it. You can't always predict those things. So that supply and demand pricing can be have quite a big impact. Changing expectations of consumers to cheap travel as a right. So people now expect that they're only going to travel if they get really cheap airfares, a really bargain basement deal at a luxury resort, and so that people actually view that as being their right now, that people are changing their attitudes to tourism and travel. Increasing costs to host communities and decreasing costs to consumers. I think that speaks for itself. And tourism industry doesn't share the costs of resource depletion and pollution. So this is a really big one. Quite often the tourism industry, not always, depends on how it's managed in the community, but in many cases the tourism industry, they'll have, you'll have your resort standing here and you'll pay your rates for that resort, and you'll purchase your water and you'll pay for all the things that you're supposed to on your site. But your tourists don't stay on that site. They go off and they use the roads and they use the public facilities, the public toilets, maybe the public swimming pool if there's one around. They use all of the facilities that are supplied, and they put pressure on often medical centres and hospitals as well. Yet there's no way of recouping those costs quite often from the tourists. They just use the free facilities as they are. In Cairns, they're starting to talk about a bed tax, which I think will eventually come into place. And a lot of other places have things like that. So there's a tax that is applied to every night that you stay in a place. You pay this tax, and that goes into helping manage those things. But not every community, and particularly in developing nations, a lot of communities don't have that. In Italy, we just pay the mafia. That's how it goes. They've got the mafia tax, and you just pay that and everything's happy. Don't know where that goes. Probably best not to ask. All right, I'm going to pause there. I'm going to stop this now because this has been a long lecture already, and I'll come back and do part 2.